I'll be serious this time if you want to start that same way.
What's that? Oh no, it's just I'm really bad at my job. I mean, the first part of my job I'm bad at is deciding to look for a job and then deciding that it would be podcasting about board games. That was mistake number one. Mistake number two is in choosing board games as a hobby. Because man, I love board games, but it is sometimes kind of a nightmare kind of hobby to participate in.
In what way?
Well, the best part about board games is the social aspect. It's getting together with your friends. It's sitting around the table and kind of having the shared experiences, and usually the best parts of it are the stuff that's going down over the table, not really what's on the table. So that is such a huge fun part, and whenever you have a really, really great board game experience, it's rarely the board game. It's usually something that happened in the game. It's something that happens, terrible puns or something that happens, funny comments here and there. It can be real life, current events, topics that just line up with some crazy thing happening in this random board game.
Even sometimes something that isn't necessarily fun in real time, but it's going to make for a heck of a story later.
Right. The looking back in hindsight. Hey, remember that time? I mean, these are the things that you're always trying to capture, and it's always bringing you back. Clearly, that is the most important part of playing board games and having a good board game group. But the problem with that is that it's the worst part of having it as a hobby, because you're doing this thing that requires everyone to kind of be on board, everyone to kind of be focused to make it work, and then now you end up having to play this thing to the tastes of 6, 7, 8 different people. Man, while that doesn't sound like a big deal, it is so easy for a game to go completely off the rails because whatever reason, this game rubs this one person the wrong way. It's a natural thing, it's present in, if you're watching movies or this or that. But I feel like when you take up a hobby like fishing, right? Fishing is better with people, generally speaking. But if someone doesn't like fishing, they go once and then they don't go. If someone doesn't like this board game you played, they keep coming back to board game night. and then they keep not liking board games.
Yeah.
That part of it, it's funny, and I'm really not trying to be mean about it. It's just what the big takeaway is for me is that I find myself putting in a tremendous amount of work trying to line up a game that's going to fit the taste of 5 or 6 different people.
And five or six very different people, right?
Right. In my game group now, we have a tremendously diverse set of people and backgrounds. We've got people from almost all age groups, all kinds of lines of work, all kinds of political beliefs, backgrounds. Everybody pretty much. We kind of got the spectrum covered as far as that goes.
Yeah, and we often joke that none of us should be able to be friends together, much less enjoy each other as much as we often do around these games.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a great strength, and ultimately, despite all the kind of funny negativity that has come already and will continue to come more than likely, that is actually the reason that board gaming is so great, that you can share that, because you have something to kind of take the pressure off. You got a thing to concentrate on to kind of take the social pressure off, and then you can kind of ease into those other things, because the board game is kind of distracting you from it. And I think that's a great thing. But, more to the point, I find it kind of interesting that someone like me is going to engage in this hobby where I am almost wedding planning on a weekly basis. You know what I mean? Like the amount of stuff that goes into having a game day. Like, does this player like this? Does that player like that? Can these 2 players sit at this same table? Do we need to have this, this 4-player game for these 4 people, and then, these 2-player games for those 4 people because this guy, I mean, it really rapidly spirals into just nonsense. And, I know a lot of that is just me. Like, it's me wanting to kind of have a semblance of control over what's getting played. Just in the sense of everybody's got these new games, so we want to make sure that these 2 games get played because, so and so just bought it, they're super excited, or we want to do a show about this game, so we want to get it played. And when you try to kind of start having these little bits of pressure on setting up a game day, suddenly all of these other problems erupt out of it. And do you see any of that, or is this like just completely my psychosis?
No, I've dealt with it as well, trying to host game days. I mean, I don't host game days partially for this exact reason. I mean, we've talked about it before. I tend to really worry about everyone at the table having a good time in board games, because if someone doesn't have a good time and they can't cope with the fact that they're not having a good time, then no one has a good time. We're all here doing this thing together, so it is important that everyone that's there tries to have a good time, but some people have different thresholds for how much stress they can handle and still have a good time. So I tend to take a lot of that on myself. When I am even hosting a board game, even playing the game, sometimes I can't even remember the strategy that I took or the turns that I took, or sometimes even what necessarily happened, because I'm more focused on the people. So planning the game days themselves, I do much the same thing. I really worry about people's tastes. I worry about people's histories with other games, and that kind of stuff. And sometimes a lot of that is inscrutable because you're dealing with folks that are possibly new gamers. Maybe you haven't played a bunch of games with them, as often happens when I host, right? And then it becomes even more difficult because you're trying to make a set list for an audience you've never performed for, and it can be incredibly difficult. So yeah, I totally get it. And we've even talked about it in terms of the group and what you've done, and you've kind of laughed about, how much time you spend preparing for this one evening that we're all sit down and play. And to us, we just sit down and we play the game, and we have a good time, and we don't think about it. But the reason we don't think about it is the people that show up at your doorstep is because you've done all that work and you do know us really well. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily to do as a host. I think that's being a good host. But as someone who is coming to the event, it's a great thing, especially if the person who's hosting knows you well enough to choose wisely.
Sometimes I feel a little bit, I guess, selfish or whatnot. I have these conversations with my wife where she is like, "You are overthinking this, why are you cranky about this? What's the big deal if so-and-so just shows up with another person at the door?" And I read these endless threads on Board Game Geek about everyone come to game day. It's like the whole world come play games at my house. It'll be amazing. And I read those and I wonder, is this all in your head? Like, have you ever held a game day? Because that doesn't work in any way, shape, or form.
Well, it's not so much have you ever held a game day, it's have you ever held a game day and it gone horribly wrong.
Right.
Because of a disconnect.
Yeah.
Not because of anything malicious, simply because of a disconnect.
Yeah, and there's that's part of my, joking earlier about the worst part about board gaming is the social aspect and the fact that you need other people to play them. Well, it's funny, but it's still, for someone like me who's kind of a self-proclaimed game scholar, I want to, just as my personal enjoyment from the hobby comes from seeing as much of what's out there as I can. I love exploring game space. I love seeing designers do something crazy out of left field that I never saw coming. Mm-hmm. That sort of thing kind of drives my love of this. Where that kind of creates a point of friction is that in order to really explore that, you kind of need 4 or 5 people that are doing the exact same thing. Really, man, it is such a niche. Even though, we did an episode, a couple, 2 episodes ago about the game hobby exploding. It's still a very kind of surface level thing, and people that want to sit down and play a 6-hour game about railroad economics just to see how it works, that is a tall order, man. And my personal frustrations come from being the guy that wants to do that.
Yeah.
I may love 18xx, I may hate 18xx, but I want to try 18xx. And the crowd that comes to your average game day is typically not going to be made up of 20 people that want to try an 18xx game.
Mm-hmm.
And where that ends up becoming a problem is that, I am finding myself maybe a little bit unsatisfied with my hobby because the things that I want to pull out of it, I'm not getting, right? And it's a selfish thing, but it's also, a hobby is a thing that you do for your own fulfillment to kind of, downtime to get you away from problems and stresses and everything else. When you're looking at that hobby and going, I'm pouring the energy and the money and the effort into this, and then I don't get to actually play with the things I've acquired, it can get a little bit stressful or a little bit non-satisfying. So, do you think that is a crazy, crazy selfish attitude, or, is that just kind of a natural, is that in your opinion like a justifiable emotion?
I don't even necessarily think that it comes down to justification, because I think that it is firmly implanted, not even in just a hobby. I think it's in everything. And the word is fulfillment, right? It's not just that you need to have successful game days, that people come and that they all judge that it's a success. It's not even that you are eking out whatever the clout is in the hobby because you've done all the latest, greatest games and tried the hotness. You have to be fulfilled in doing so, sort of based on your own categories. It's no different than work, right? I mean, you can be working an amazing job, everyone at your work can love you, and you can even love everyone at work, and you can think the projects are awesome, but if there's something about the job that disconnects with the reason why you took the job in the first place, then you're not fulfilled. I don't think there's anything wrong in trying to
improve it.
Well, yeah. It's not even that. It's more trying to more fully understand what brought you to the hobby in the first place, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was maybe poorly shooting for when I last spoke. But I don't think it's so much a problem in the sense of I want to play Arkwright, and the ability to play a 5-hour board game about spreadsheets is going to be hard to sell to the game group.
Yeah.
It's not complaining about that specifically. That just is what it is. I guess my question that I was trying to connect was, is it bad to be trying to improve that situation, to be trying to game the schedules and game the timing and game the attendance to set up a situation where that can happen? The feedback I've gotten in the past is when I set up a game, like this is going to be done, we're going to play this, it's a 5-player game, and we're ready to rock and roll, and then 6 people show up to game night. Now we have to not play that thing that I prepared all week for.
Yeah.
It's, there's 2 viewpoints on that, and the thing is that I think they're both somewhat valid, right? There's the viewpoint of, wow, you got 6 players instead of 5. That's awesome. Now we can play 2 3-player games, or we can play a big event game that's 6 players that we normally don't have enough people for. This is all upside. That's one viewpoint of it. But the other viewpoint is, again, I'm trying to tailor this experience so that, the rules aren't really an issue. They're not really holding us back. We can kind of have some kind of mastery, at least someone at the table, a little bit of a mastery of what's about to happen, so that the gameplay can be smooth. And when gameplay is smooth, that's when all that fun stuff happens, right? When we're nosing a rule book every 30 seconds, that is not a fun time. It's really not.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're playing something super obtuse and we all know going in, this is going to be a game where there's going to be a nose in the rule book for the next hour and a half.
Yeah.
And we kind of all go in there like troops into the breach, like this is going to happen, and those are fine. But on a typical random game night, if someone's nose is in the book for 20 minutes, that game night is a really bad game night.
Yeah.
Just as far as, like you said, everyone's enjoyment and, just overall fulfillment of having had that game day. So I guess what I'm saying is that I really put a lot of mental effort into avoiding those situations. And the net result of that is that when I put in that effort and then it gets sidetracked or it gets the carpet pulled off from underneath it, because of one of those random things, that it kind of generates a little bit of a little bit of angst in me, and I'm a grown up. It isn't like I start actively getting all surly and everything.
You just have sadness coffee and then get back to the game.
Right. I'm adult about it. It's fine. And if I wasn't adult about it, you clowns are not going to let me
Nope.
get away with that without taking me down a notch. So that's not a worry. But I find myself really actively kind of Nick Furying this, like putting together a team. We're going to play this game. We're going to do it at this time, at this day, and then to have it go sideways. Oh man, it puts me in a little bit of a teeth grind. And I've been confronted about that kind of on the side of dude, you're just overthinking this way too much. Just let it go. It's not that big a deal. We got to play games. And I get frustrated by that, and for all the reasons that I mentioned.
Well, you pretty much segued straight into what I was thinking the whole time you were talking when you made the crack about how we wouldn't let you get away with having a bad response. And that's because we all gather around this table and we all get the benefit of being this group of folks that wants to gather around and play these games that maybe aren't more readily playable out in the wild. If you just sort of walk up to a random group and say, hey, let's play a game. And I think we all cherish that, but I'm not going to start a whole conversation about social contracts and what they are and how they operate. However, it's a two-way street. I can only speak for myself, but I know when I show up to one of your game days, I know you've put in this effort. And as a result, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to play a game and I'm going to choose to have as much fun as I possibly can have playing that game. And you know me, I can enjoy any game. Like I'm a weirdo like that, and that even a bad game, I can find the one interesting part about it that I'll take away and hold up above all the stuff that wasn't fun. So to me, a lot of times the game is irrelevant, and I'm there just because I want to experience a game and see something interesting and sort of grow as an individual through the process of playing a game. To me, it doesn't matter. Regardless of who shows up, and regardless of how much work you've put into it, there's going to be a game there, and I'm going to enjoy it because you have done the work. Now, with that said, I'm not therefore going to be a guy who shows up and says, "Oh, I thought we were going to play this other game," or, "Oh, this isn't a game I want to play," because I feel like removing myself from the process of figuring out what we're going to play takes away my right to do those things. Now, the flip side of that, though, is that because we don't have an understanding necessarily, we haven't had a big long discussion about like we're having now, which, by the way, I will have a contract at the end that I'll need you to sign to agree to the terms of our friendship.
That would solve a lot of problems.
Oh, jeez, wouldn't it? But the thing is, if I was to come to you and say, hey, there's this game that it's an older game, it's not the hotness, no one's going to care, it's not even that great of a game, but I really, really, really want to play it. And I think that you guys might enjoy it, you may not, but it's just important to me. Can we get it some table space on a game night? And if you agreed to that, then I would bear the burden of sort of dealing with the fallout of if the game was a flop or not and all that kind of stuff. But in the same vein, if I then showed up and said, hey, we're going to play this game, I wouldn't want you hemming and hawing about the fact that I brought a game, right? Because it's a courtesy that I do to you when you plan the game night. So I think it just comes down to the social dynamic of the group. And I think at our group, for the most part, everyone understands the amount of effort that goes into it because all of us have hosted game nights and all of us have taught games, and we know how hard it is to teach a game and how hard it is to prep for that and to be the referee all night long while your friends are enjoying this experience that you've sort of put in front of them. Specifically in our situation, I don't think anyone misunderstands, but in a more general sense, I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing to do as long as, one, there is honesty and understanding within the group, but also a bit of generosity that says, I'll take this responsibility if you take that responsibility. And they don't even have to be equal responsibilities. As long as there is that give and take, then I think it's fine. But what's more, the bigger thing that you have to kind of go for, or that I go for, and that I look to the people around me to go for as well, to make sure that there isn't this undermining of the unspoken agreements between us as friends, right? That we're going to kind of enjoy these experiences together, is that as long as there's an honesty that says why it is that you want to play the particular game. I mean, if it is something that you know is going to rub someone the wrong way because of a theme or because of a mechanic or something like that, as long as you can tell that person, look, I know this may not be your cup of tea, but I really want to play it. It's not going to become a new nightly feature or anything like that, but can we just try this out? I feel like mature adults can approach that situation and move on, and you don't have to worry about there being a backlash, and you certainly don't have to feel guilty about contriving a situation in order to get the thing you want, because you're being honest about it, and people can either agree or disagree, and that's just being in a group of friends.
Yeah, that's how I personally feel about it as well. I don't lose a whole lot of sleep about showing up to game day and being like, I brought this and we are going to play it at some point. I don't care when, but it's going to happen before we go. I don't have a terrible amount of guilt about that, but it's just something that springs up from time to time. And it may just be a question of living in a place where the gamer density isn't super high. The Pacific Northwest, it's one of the centers of gaming for sure, but only in the city of Seattle proper. If you live anywhere but downtown Seattle, then it becomes pretty sparse pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
I think that may be a problem for me, being the kind of gaming archaeologist that I am. Where I've got a copy of Titan sitting on my shelf that I want to play, and I read the rule book, and I know that, man, everyone's going to hate this. but I just want to play it from the sense of, this game would have been my favorite game when I was like 10, because it's just so sprawling, and so, it's just got, this idea of playing almost two games in one. I don't know if you're familiar with how it works, but you basically have these armies, you recruit on this main map, and they march around doing their thing. And whenever two stacks of armies meet up, you see what terrain they're on, you pull out this other map board, and then you set up and you have like a little war. Not only is that the kind of game I would have loved as a 10-year-old, it's the kind of game I would have invented as a 10-year-old. So having that and seeing that sit there makes me go, man, I want to play this.
Yeah.
But then, realistically, I just know from playing the amount of games that I've played and experiencing the different types and settings for games that I've experienced, that I can just read the rule book and go, you know what? This is a cool concept, but this is a game that was made in 1980, and you can tell it was made in 1980 because, the game is going to take 8 hours. Each little mini battle is going to take like 10 minutes to resolve. And while it's being resolved, the other 4 players are like twiddling their thumbs and staring at the ceiling. Like, it's a disaster. Like, there's no chance that this is going to be worth playing. That's what makes me a little angsty sometimes, is that desire to experience that thing that I haven't experienced, and it's sitting there on my shelf. But I know, like, I am literally ruining 4 other people's game day if I throw this down. And again, I'm not a monster, so I haven't done that to anyone. But, it gets me on these trains of thoughts of what a silly hobby this is, that to enjoy, to do the thing that I really want to do, that I have spent money on and committed time to. I have to do all that, and then I have to pause and attract 4 other people that have put in the same time, put in the same work, and are willing to make the same sacrifice, just so that we can all, 5 hours later, look across the table and go,
well, that was bad.
Yep, never again. You know, and man, even saying it sounds like such nonsense, you know?
No, it's not. And you actually, you opened up the door to figuring this thing out. And that was that the perceived requirement to getting a game like that on the table is that you have to have people that have invested as much time as you, as much thought as you into the hobby, and therefore have an enthusiasm that can carry this kind of stuff. And I think that part of that is, what's a polite way to say this?
No need for politeness. We'll edit it out later.
Yeah, let's say here it comes. Here's the one that
yeah. Man, I've never seen you so tongue tied.
I know, right? This is bad. Hang on, let me drink some tea.
Well, don't overthink. Then
yeah, we'll rag it back. Anyway, board gaming is a hobby that has a background, right, in sort of private enthusiasm and a certain amount of great personal industry in order to get into the hobby and to maintain one's activity in the hobby, right? You had to seek out the games, you had to learn them. In some cases, people were translating rule books from other languages. You know, I mean, not less than 10 years ago, this was still happening.
Absolutely.
And so there's an amount of intensity and intelligence that comes with that. However, as we all know, when you get a group of people that have done that amount of effort on their own, not as a group, but privately on their own in order to maintain this hobby, you have a lot of people with a lot of investment and a lot of intelligence. And what that means is that there's going to be clashes in tastes or even values, right? I mean, the things that I value and the things that I look for in games may be different than the things you look for in games. And that is the rub. And this is why you get that stigma of the alpha gamer that sort of tells everyone how they're supposed to not only behave in the game, but how they're supposed to perceive how everyone else is behaving in the game. And then afterward tells them why they should or shouldn't like the game.
Right.
I don't think it's because board gamers somehow statistically come from a stock that is more likely to be rude or anything like that. I think it just comes from that. It's pot commitment, right? It's the same thing as selection bias, but it's rearing its head in the way that you approach a scenario like this. However, all that, like the whole reason I said all that was to say that I don't necessarily think that thing is a rule that has to be above any other priority in setting up a game day. I don't think you have to adhere to the preferences that come out of a person's background in order to find an experience that's going to be enjoyable for them. I think it exists to a certain degree because we all have to deal with it, right? You know, I have things I like and don't like, and so do you. And sometimes we have to check those things when we sit down at a game that doesn't fall into
Venn diagram of what we like.
Exactly, you know,
Yeah.
and we have to do that as individuals. And so I don't necessarily think that this is the rule, and that in order to have a good game day, you have to find a way to sort of navigate this rule with all these variables, which are the people involved, in order to get the thing you want. I think at some point you just kind of have to throw up your hand and say, okay, I want to play this game for this specific reason. Who wants to show up and play it?
Yeah.
And the people that are willing to sort of check their personal priorities at the door, they'll show up and they'll play it. And if they're unwilling to do so and they show up to play it, well, again, like you said, none of us knuckleheads at the table are going to let them get away with it. You know, we're all going to rag on each other for sort of pooping on the game night. But I think that the interesting thing that can happen, and what hopefully happens in a situation like this, is that you find out that there are people in the game group who are interested in similar things to you, but maybe for different reasons than you necessarily have, but you can find a commonality there. And then suddenly that whole process of trying to slot in games with specific gamers, it becomes a little bit more interesting because now you have a greater understanding of that person. So I don't think that you have to get a snap view of a person based on the first 5 games that they vocalize they don't enjoy, or the first 10 games that you see them squirming in their seat, and then try to negotiate that. I think that all that stuff is useful, and again, makes you a good host to sort of notice those things and to be socially sensitive to that, to try to create situations where someone's going to enjoy the game to the utmost ability of what can happen in that specific group. However, I also think that part of that is outliers and understanding what those outliers are, because just because it's not in the center of what you observe on a typical day doesn't mean it's not part of who the person is. You kind of have to do some different situations like that to even suss out the social dynamic of the group, right? I mean, you have to throw 18xx on the table knowing full well that it might flop, hoping that it won't, but simply for the express purpose of finding out who enjoys it, who's willing to even try it, and if it goes badly, how badly does it go? Because we all have games in our collection that whenever you put it on the table the first time, you look at everyone at the table and you go, okay, the first playthrough of this is going to be horrible, but the second time you're going to love it. And I think the same thing goes in games group, where you have to say, okay guys, the first time that we play this, we all may not understand why this game is in the top 100, or we may never want to play this game or any other game again. Like, this may be it. This may be where the wheels come off. However, you survive those experiences, and you, in the very least, you come out with more information about what makes your particular group tick and all the people involved tick, and what makes it gel as a cohesive group that can do this thing together. Or you come out with a game that you all enjoy. I mean, those are the only two options if you're paying attention to it socially, right? You either get more information or you get a new experience that you can share. So I don't think it's bad. Again, as long as you're being honest, as long as you're not,
right,
cutting people off at the knees without giving them the chance to sort of, I don't know, show up and be mature, right?
Yeah, I like what you said about kind of the meta filter that's on all of this, that the self-selection, I guess, is definitely a thing. People who historically were gamers, and for anybody probably over the age of like 35 or 40, we grew to love gaming in a very, very different environment than people that have just started gaming 5 years ago. And I think that difference in kind of the perspective plays a huge part in that, because and it's not good or bad, it just is. As you said, for people that have been doing this a long time, it was a tremendous amount of effort to make a game happen. And I think even though you kind of took the track that can kind of create some stubbornness and conflict at the gaming table, I think more often than not, that creates an environment where people are actually a little more capable of speaking strongly about a game, debating a game, the back and forth. Those are specifically the people that have that inherent understanding of how difficult it is, like how hard it was to lay this game out, to figure out how it works, to read that rule book, which I love rule books as a rule. Like, as a rule, that was really bad. But I mean, I actually enjoy cracking open that rule book and starting to read like the driest rule book in the world, except for High Frontier. I enjoy ripping those open and having a read. I like that, and I know that is not something that most people are going to be into, but the point is that everybody when I sit down at a table with a bunch of like people that have been playing 25-year gaming veterans, while our opinions are often kind of set in stone, I think the overall kind of respect level, for lack of a better word, is higher, as far as understanding, how difficult a process it is to get a game to a playable state,
mm-hmm. Yeah.
and share it with the group, mm-hmm. whether they like it or not. Whereas I think, to just speak in generalities, that someone who didn't grow up like that, who has started gaming in an era of, where it's just social deduction games and Ticket to Ride and these amazing games that are out there that are super engaging, super fun, got a decent chunk of strategy with 4-page rulebook. I think when that's their first exposure and they're like, this is awesome, I think a lot of times those are the people that unintentionally sit down to one of these more crunchy, obtuse games and then just have a miserable time. And they don't even, they don't even know that that is radiating out into the group, because they just, and it's nothing they did wrong. It's just they don't have that kind of inherent understanding of what a process some of these games are.
Mm-hmm. Some of this is knowing your audience, though, right? I mean,
right.
You said it yourself. Most of the people, well, even just our games group, for example, most of the people are 20-year veterans at this point, and even the people that don't necessarily communicate everything that they're thinking are more than able to communicate what they're thinking. Like, everyone has a deep vocabulary that they can bring to bear to talk about games on a higher level. But even with that said, you still have to know your audience. And, for people that have a vast knowledge of it, it's really easy sometimes to even be thinking out loud, and this happens to me a lot. Like, for people that tend to talk fast and think out loud like me, we have to constantly be careful that we're not just being a dictator to everybody and just making everyone kowtow to what they think our opinion is, when sometimes we're trying to figure out our opinion out loud. Some of this disconnect is even that. Like, there oftentimes is a situation, I've had it before several times, where you sit down at a table and we're going to play this big crunchy war game, and everyone's excited and everyone has an enthusiasm level that says, wow, these people know what they're doing. These people are interested, and, maybe, someone's teaching a game and they're just doing an amazing job, and you're going, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then you start talking about the game, and you see a couple people just sort of turn inward and get quiet, because even though they were enthusiastic, maybe they didn't have the experience to understand a lot of the framework that is setting up where an opinion is coming from. And so they either are taking it at face value as if it's the law, or they're just fighting it because it sounds absurd to them because they don't have a frame of reference. And it was because, in my case, I mean, what I'm talking about here is because I assumed that everyone that was at the table had been playing war games since they were in high school. And I didn't realize that there were some people at the table who this was the one war game that they had ever played. And they thought this was what war games were like. And that was just my misunderstanding and a failing on my part, that I should have known those people a little bit better to be able to try to communicate, not even communicate, to try to be able to interact with that conversation better, right? Because it's not just about me communicating what I think. It's about interacting and having a conversation about the game.
Yeah, I think I don't need me to cut you off here.
No, it's fine.
I think I disagree with that a little bit, in the sense that I don't think you were at fault for that. It's certainly a learning experience, and that's something you can grow from. Like you said, know your audience, realize that, my experiences and my viewpoints aren't everyone else's experiences and viewpoints. Mm-hmm. That's a great lesson from that. But I wouldn't accept any fault or blame for it happening, because I think you can equally assign that sort of blame it's a harsher word than necessary, but you can kind of assign responsibility for that communication breakdown to the other people at the table too. And this is kind of like one of the, if you want to get on the hot button subjects, which we said we weren't going to do, one thing that really kind of turns me into a reactionary is this whole idea of elitism, because that drives me nuts. And not because elitism doesn't exist, or that elitism isn't a fairly off-putting trait to run across in your life. I get it. However, I feel like a lot of internet terms, it gets thrown around a lot where it isn't present. As you pointed out earlier, and as we have talked about, gaming has a language. Gaming has, a lot of tropes. It has a lot of things that you can play a game and notch your belt, and what you learned how to do in that game will then show up 10 games down the line, and then 20 games down the line. And you start to see these recurring themes and these recurring kind of arcs, and you get to a point where you can sit down at a game, look at it, and kind of already know how to play before the rules have even started, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fluency. That's having read tons and tons of rule books and played tons and tons of games and had tons and tons of experience doing that thing. And that is no different than if you are a carpenter and you've been building things for 25 years, and someone can show you a picture of something and you look at it and go, I can suss out how to build that. And you may have to like look something up here or there, but for the most part, you can take a step back, look at it for a minute, and be off to the races at building it. And I think that exists in gaming. Like, you build up this language, you build up this set of concepts that are recyclable and useful and awesome to just kind of decode a game, your first run through. Or likewise, if it's a game you've played 50 times, there's a level of expertise and a way to talk about it, that again is coming from your experiences within that. And the problem is, like, what I'm getting at is that way, way, way too often I see people calling that out as elitism. That someone can have a depth of knowledge greater than yours, and that means that they are elitist. Or that when someone says, we're going to play Democra today, and then someone says, I want to play, and you have already last game day played, Lords of Waterdeep, and it took 4 hours instead of 2. Because this person was just not picking it up super quick. I don't think there is literally nothing wrong with being like, I don't think you're quite ready for this one. This is not something you're going to enjoy, or this is a game that, is going to require your attention for 5.5 hours, and I know you, and you're not going to be happy about playing this. And I see that so often vilified as elitism, and it's not. It's just saying, it's using your expertise and making a judgment call. Anyone who ignores that in any walk of life, in any profession or hobby or anything that discounts the experience of someone who's been doing it for 30 years, to throw that out and label elitism is crazy.
Okay, so the last thing you said was the ticket. And that was that to throw out the experience of the people that have been doing it for so long, right? Because the concept of this conversation is that I'm sitting here and there's this person talking down to me, therefore that person's elite. However, just like I was saying that there was a disconnect in that situation with the war game, because I had a perception and that person had a perception. If I was to look at that person and say that this disconnect is because they don't have the prerequisite understanding for all this stuff in order to play this game, then I think that could be probably not the best way for me to come at it as a person with my perspective. But likewise, for them to look at me and go, whoa, this guy is just, gosh, I mean, he's talking down to everyone, is also just as short-sighted. I mean, there's that great saying that it's the novice who exaggerates, right?
Right.
And I think that this is exactly the core of where this conversation rides, and that is that you have experiential novices who maybe haven't been in the hobby for a long time, and there's this exaggeration of, oh yeah, I love board games, therefore I love everything in the top 100, not realizing that even now, there's probably a pretty high percentage of those games that wouldn't see play on a typical game day, just
Right.
because of the level of difficulty and that kind of stuff. Not difficulty in terms of playing it, but the amount of effort, right? The amount of attention that you have to even deal in to get the game on the table and have everyone understand the rules and that kind of stuff, because they're complicated. Some of these rule books are gosh, they're like 30 pages long.
Right.
And that's just a big commitment. And it's a novice thing to do to say, oh yeah, I'm into this hobby, therefore I'm into all of it. However, it's a more experienced thing to say, no, I like these particular aspects of it. Again, I mean, you made the woodworking example. It's a novice that says, oh, I'm a woodworker, I can build anything with wood. Whereas it's the old hand who's been doing it forever that goes, no, I know how to turn wood. And those guys, like, they just use a lathe and that's it. And they could probably build you a table, but what they know how to do is turn stuff on a lathe. Whereas
right.
a general carpenter may have some trouble trying to turn a bowl with, a really crazy piece of wood that's just going to explode when you put a chisel on it. Again, it's experience talking. However, there's a flip side to this, right? And the flip side, because I always have to do this to you, is that those of us that have been in the hobby for 10, 15, 20 years, we're novices in dealing with people who aren't like us.
Right.
And we tend to be cavalier in the way that we approach games, and that's the way that we exaggerate, is that we assume, I think wrongfully, that everyone has the same history and frame of reference that we do. And again, if it's about a disconnect and a miscommunication, it's always to a certain degree a two-way street. And I'm not saying that because it actually always is. I'm just saying, like, there's always something that each person at the table can do to benefit the situation. And so between the two of us having the conversation, I think the thing to do is understand that when we charge out there and go, this game is amazing and it's the best game ever and here's why, we kind of need to be reading the reactions of people. And if someone looks like a deer in headlights, okay, maybe we need to rag it back a little bit and have them understand that the reason we're saying that is because this game does all of these things that we find important a little bit better. And then the converse to that is that if someone comes up and holds a little micro game over their head and says, this is the most complex game ever, this game has so much game space, I don't understand why anyone would ever play a big box game because this thing is bigger than anything you've ever played before, and they plop it down and they pull out 4 cards and it ends up being, another werewolf clone. We need to understand that's that exaggeration. And it's not an exaggeration because the person is incapable of having the same experiences that we have had. It's just that they haven't had them yet. And I think the benevolent way to sort of go about it is to help people have those experiences. So for my part, I would welcome people at my table knowing full well that everything may go completely belly up. However, I would do that because I would want to have that discussion, and I would want to be able to say, why didn't you enjoy this game? And have those things out in the air instead of keeping them behind closed doors. And I think that's the rub, is that to people that are getting into the hobby, they see those determinations being made in a realm that is inscrutable to them. And so they see it as some sort of backroom dealing in between veterans in the hobby instead of understanding that it's just something that hasn't had to come up yet, and that there hasn't been table talk like that commonly between people that are coming from so vastly different backgrounds in terms of gaming, right? Because you were either in it or you weren't, and it wasn't that there were just 15 to 30 different levels of activity you could have within the hobby. So for my part, I say try to get people talking. Heck, man. This next game day, let's play Titan. Let's do it.
Man, you're going to regret that.